Welcome back into Fond du Lac today on News Talk 1450 and 100.7 KFIZ. Joining us now is Douglas Mullenix. He's asking for your vote this Tuesday in the 6th Congressional District race. Good morning, Douglas. How's it going today?
It's going well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you stopping by. Very busy time for yourself. And, you're just days away from finding out if you're going to win an election.
Yeah, so the election is August 9th, so we're a couple days away. Can't believe I'm saying that because for the past 4 months, it's just been day after day meeting with people, speaking with certain groups, knocking on doors, introducing myself, talking about the issues, and Tuesday the 9th is the big day.
And, you talked about the campaign. When did you officially decide you wanted to run?
Yeah, it was last summer. So I've actually been doing this for about a year, even though most of the political coverage is kind of really kicked up this year, which makes a lot of sense. I think there's a lot of people that, especially after the 2020 elections, were kind of trying to put politics out of their mind and kind of just, get back to having fun. In the summer, we were coming out of COVID, and but past 5-6 months or so, it's really been political season here in Wisconsin.
Definitely. And let's learn a little about yourself, Douglas. Your background, where you're originally from. What can you tell us?
Yeah. So I live in Menasha. I'm 32, which would actually make me, at least currently would make me the youngest member of Congress, even though I assume there's a race there somewhere in the country that might have someone younger. I'm not a politician. I come from the private sector, so worked 6 years in private equity and then transferred over into the healthcare consulting space. And actually got into this race through a couple key issues, focusing on mental health, improving mental health coverage and expanding veterans benefits. And it's actually an interesting story for those who know Glenn Grothman. The way I got into this race is probably the most Glenn Grothman story ever. In my work, I consulted for healthcare providers that were shut down, deemed non-essential, and had this extra time on my hand. And so was looking at different mental health issues that were going around, particularly in children. And then coming from a veteran family, I'm not a veteran, but several members of my family are, veterans issues are always at the top of mind. And I was reading about these suicides and vets with PTSD. And I came up with two simple solutions, which is establish mental health as medically necessary under law, and also create a simple rule that if you're a veteran with PTSD, you get your full benefits, you go to the doctor of your choice, no more red tape that you have to cut through. And so I took these proposals to Glenn. He is my congressman, and I tried calling him, emailing him, looked up the numbers and emails for his staff members, and kept going through the process and just never heard back. And then I spoke to a lot of people in the neighborhood, and they had the same experience. They reached out to him, and either they didn't hear back or they got one of those standard pre-written emails. And so after a while, you care about these issues. I care about mental health. I care about veterans benefits. And you just decide, if you're not going to take these issues up, I'm going to get into the race.
So you kind of mentioned, some of the issues that are near and dear to your heart. How about, you talked about how, you weren't getting the response you wanted from the current congressman. How do you envision a congressman should help you out? What should be the role of a congressman?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, they are the voice of your area, and they need to put their district's needs first and foremost. And so our slogan's ready to listen, ready to lead. And what we found with Glenn is doesn't listen to the people. He's very good at going to parades. No one can go to more parades than he. I've tried. It's just, I tip my hat to him on that. But he walks down the parade, waves, and then goes back to his car and drives off and doesn't really listen to what the people need. But even worse is he doesn't lead Wisconsin's 6th District in Congress. He's the only member, outside of Scott Fitzgerald, who's brand new, he's the only member of the Wisconsin delegates that has never authored a bill that got passed into law. And so, especially when you consider our place on the national map, Wisconsin's that swing state that 2 years from now, every single politician is going to come in, and presidential hopeful is going to come in and try to get our vote, then we should have a voice on the national stage. And when you look at Glenn Grothman, you don't have that.
So how can you get something, like if you were to win the election how would you go about getting something passed through Congress?
Yeah, so the first thing is you have to be willing to work with the other side. And Glenn is probably as far right as you can get in Congress. I don't really like labels, but I know if given a label, I'm going to be a little bit closer to the center on the Republican side. And I think it's about focusing on what needs to be done and finding those bipartisan issues. And there are several members of the Democrats that will work on certain key measures. So I'll give you one that just happened is there was the Federal Firefighters Fairness Act. And this was an act that basically expanded benefits and compensated for firefighters who had long-term injuries on the job. And it was mostly bipartisan. Republicans were about half split down the middle, and passed the House, and Glenn voted no on it. And this one was particularly frustrating to myself and a lot of the community because, crime and safety is always a big one. Mm-hmm. And he always goes on about defending first responders and keeping families safe. And here you have our fire department, and you're voting against their benefits. And so, when we think of firemen, we think of our firefighters, we think of all first responders, and if this is the way you vote on there, then you're not going to get anything done when helping all first responders.
We had Douglas Mullenix in this morning. He's asking for your vote this upcoming Tuesday in the 6th Congressional District. We're getting closer and closer to the election. You already mentioned kind of some of the issues you differ from Grothman. What are some of the other ways that you kind of lean?
Yeah, look, there's a couple ones that stand out. Number one is I talked about veterans benefits, and he just voted against, it's called the PACT Act, which passed Congress and then passed the Senate. And it basically, just like the firefighters one I mentioned, it provides for benefits for injured veterans. And again, this kind of goes into what are you fighting for? What are you doing in Congress? Is it just because a Democrat introduced it? If a Democrat introduces raising your taxes or spending, fight against it. I'm with you on that. But in this case, these veterans fought for us. We have to fight for them. Mm-hmm. There's another big one in that if anyone's a hunter or wildlife enthusiast, there's a conservation bill that's been in this country for about 100 years since the FDR days, and it's called the Pittman-Robertson Act. And what it does is through a small surtax, it creates a direct tax and funding for conservation. Where every time an ammunition or a firearm is sold, a small percentage of that goes to a conservation fund, which is distributed to the states. Wisconsin gets about $50 million. This is a law that has been attributed to the survival of the bald eagle. And Glenn Grothman recently introduced, I forget the formal name of it, but it's a law. It would be a bill that would repeal the Pittman-Robertson Acts, which would be devastating for conservation. And then I would say the final one is student debt is a problem in this country. And there's no doubt about it. It's expensive to go to college. You leave college and you still have this debt on your hands that sometimes you can never pay off. Now, we're taking two different approaches about how to fix that. So Glenn has just introduced a bill that would limit how much you could borrow federally to go to school, which all that's going to do is prevent lower and middle income students from attaining the funds they need to go to college. I come from the finance world, so I view that solution that proposal as terrible, to be honest. And I've put forward a new way of thinking, which is let's look at society and see what positions are we desperately reaching out for. And you're always hearing about we need more doctors, nurses, teachers, a couple other positions. And I say, when we look at the federal student loan program, let's change the interest rate to incentivize people to go into those fields. So right now, a typical interest rate could be 6 to 7%. Now, if someone's going into my line of work in private equity, you don't need a 5-year degree from a med school. that might stay the same. But if someone wants to go be a nurse or a teacher, maybe you give them 1%, 2% interest loans. Just start talking about a solution that actually can reduce the cost of education rather than just saying, oh, you can only borrow this much, and if you come from a lower or middle income family, well, I'm sorry, maybe you'll have to pick a different school. I mean, if you get into the school of your choice, you should be able to go.
Definitely makes sense there. Student loan forgiveness, how about that? Your thoughts?
I'm not on board with that. I was okay with the suspension of payments during COVID. That made sense. But to just think that you're going to forgive loans is it's purely un-American. The loan's not forgiven. It's just transferred to the taxpayer. And the question I would have, which no one seems to talk about, is let's say you forgive every loan. Well, the cost of college is still high. So you actually haven't fixed the problem going forward. And that's why if you put forward and this, hey, look, this would take a whole team, would want to get a lot of congressmen and senators on board and develop a plan as a group. But that's why if you looked at it from what if we could take the loan and for some of these positions like a teacher who, God bless them, don't make the most salaries in the world, maybe gave them a lower interest rate, you might be able to solve the problem more effectively with a long-term solution in mind.
Awesome. Douglas Mullenix in this morning. He's asking for your vote in the 6th Congressional District. Before I let you get out of here, Douglas, I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Put together a commercial for me. Why should someone vote for you?
I like to say this. Glenn Grothman is the incumbent. He's been there for 4 terms. He's seeking a 5th term. He's been in government for about 30 years. If you like the way that Congress operates, where nothing gets done, Glenn's your guy. Never introduced a bill, and he's just fine staying that way. If you want real-world solutions, not a politician, someone from the private sector who's going to come in, work with the other side when reasonable, then vote for Douglas Mullenix on August 9th. You can read more about us at douglasmullenix.com or douglasforwisconsin.com. It's a little hard to spell Mullenix. Yeah, I get that a lot. But anyway, August 9th is the primary. We have, just a reminder to all your listeners, we have an open primary, so you don't have to be a registered Republican to vote, but you can only vote in one party. So make sure you only do that because you don't want your vote discounted or anything of that matters. But August 9th is the primary.
Douglas, thanks for the time. Appreciate chatting with you.
Thank you.
Best of luck. This is KFIZ.